Hi everybody, welcome to your writing lesson for today. Since we are starting to wrap up our writing time together, today's lesson is going to focus on revising our stories since they are complete or close to being complete. We're going to revise them using a checklist. So hopefully at this point you've already watched the video from published author Kate Messner, and you heard a little bit about how even as a published author, someone who sells millions of copies of books, she had to take her time and go back and revise her writing over and over and over again, not just one time, but many times, just to make it the best that it can be, to make sure that it is the best writing that she can produce, the best writing that she can put out. And I don't know about you guys, but whenever I'm trying to make something better or whenever I'm trying to do anything at all, I like to have a to-do list or a checklist. It just really helps me to focus what I can do to make it better. Because if you just tell me to go back to my writing and make it better, well, I've already done that. I've already thought that I've done that. I've already made it the best that I thought it could be. But when I have a checklist or a to-do list, I can be a little bit more focused on what exactly I need to do to make my writing better. So we're going to use this narrative writing checklist to make sure that we've met all of the requirements, or we're working to meet all of the requirements of what we are saying a fourth grade narrative should look like to make it the best that we can make it. So let's just take a minute and let's dive in a little bit deeper to look at this checklist. And you should notice that as we're looking at this checklist, it directly correlates to the mini lessons that we've been having on while we've been drafting. You'll even see that parts of this go exactly along with some of the lessons that we've had. So for some of these, you're going to need to go back and do some revising, but for some of them, you may have already done it and you don't need to do any revising. So when we look at this checklist here, it's broken into three different parts: the structure of it, how it's written, the development of it, which is how your plot comes to life, and then the language and conventions. Today, we're just going to focus on this structure and this development, and later on this week, we're going to talk more about the language and conventions. These two obviously have the most in them, and so we're going to take a look at them bit by bit. When we're looking at the structure, these are the points that we've really taken a look at already. Overall, we want to make sure that we have a story that tells an important plot. It's not just going on and on. We're not telling parts that aren't important. So that's just when we're looking at this overall part here, we're just making sure that we have an overall beginning, middle, end that all flows together and is a good story. The lead is something that we've already talked about. We've already gone back and revised our leads. That's our beginning, that opening paragraph, how we're opening up our story. So take a look at that. You might still need to go back and revise your lead another time. You may have come up with another great idea for your lead, and that's totally fine. Take a look, revisit your lead, make sure it's how you want it to be. Then we have that transition. Guys, transitions are something that you talk about with every single type of writing. We want to make sure that when you went from scene to scene, when you drafted from scene to scene, it all flows together. And did you use those transition words, which it gives you examples right here of what kind of transition words is just then or suddenly to show or after a while or a little later. So if you're stuck and you're saying, well, I don't know what transition words to use this checklist right here. It has some transition words that you can use right here in it. But you want to make sure that there's a flow from scene to scene, from part to part. Then here we're talking about the ending, which again, we had a mini lesson on. How are we going to end our story? Because we're not going to just write the end or and they lived happily ever after. We have to make sure it comes to a close. And so revisit this part of the checklist to make sure your story comes to a close. And then finally, that organization part. We wrote it when we drafted scene by scene on separate sheets of paper. But even within those scenes, you might have used paragraphs to separate different parts of those. At the very least, each of those scenes, when you create your published piece, each of those scenes should be their own paragraph. So you would indent for each of those scenes when you put it all together. But like I said, even within those scenes, you should have, or you might have, I should say, different paragraphs within those scenes. So you want to make sure that when you do come up with your published piece, when you write it all together, that you have paragraphs to separate those different parts. Okay, and so that's really what we're looking at when we're looking at the structure of our writing. And so you're going to want to use this checklist to go back through and make sure that you've done each of these things to the best of your ability. Just take another look. Remember, we said that word revise means to look again. So take a second look. Now, this development part here is really important because you could have the structure of a paper, but if the content of it, if the story itself isn't developed, then who cares? No one wants to read it, right? We want to read a paper, a story that's developed. That's how we feel a part of the story. That's how we feel connected to the story. So this is where we really need to focus a lot of attention. Although there's only two little elements here, there's a lot within them that you can do to make your story even better. So for the elaboration piece, when I think of that word elaboration, I think of the word details. And so you just want to make sure that you have added more details to the heart of your story, including not only the actions and dialogue, but also the thoughts and the feelings. That goes back to when we talked about how your paper should not just be, your story should not just be dialogue. It should not just be characters talking. There has to be more there. You have to develop that part of it, add those details so that we understand the thoughts, the feelings, the surrounding, our setting, what's going on around us. That's the part that you're going to go back and you're going to want to develop more. So read through your paper, revise your paper scene by scene to make sure that you have elaborated enough on each of those scenes. Okay? Then when we're taking a look at the craft of our paper, we want to make sure, again, we've showed why our characters did what they did, and by including their thinking. That really goes along with that elaboration piece. They kind of go together there. You want to make some of your parts of your story go quickly, but some need to go more slowly. So the whole paper shouldn't feel slow, and it shouldn't feel like it's dragging on forever. Some parts are allowed to go a little bit quicker if they're not as important, but some parts where you want us to feel the most connected, where you want us to really feel deeply, then you're going to want to go a little slower and describe a little bit more, adding a little bit more there. You also want to make sure that you've gone through and you've included precise and sometimes sensory details, using that figurative language and bringing your story to life. I think about the example paper that we read last week about the football player. And we talked about that story was a story about what a great football player he was and how strong he was. And I was thinking of all the great figurative language that we could have added there to show what a great football player he was and how strong he was and how larger than life. Think about a simile, metaphor, personification, bringing him larger to life. We could have done that. That author could have done that with that description of that character. So I want you to go back through your paper as you're revising and think about places where you can just use some figurative language to really paint a clearer picture of maybe the setting, maybe the scene, maybe the feelings, maybe the character itself, wherever you can add that figurative language in there. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you're using a storytelling voice and conveying the emotions and tones of your story through your description, through your phrases, through your dialogue, through your thoughts. That's why we took so much time on the front end, really planning what we wanted the tone of our paper to be, what we wanted our story to be about, so that as we were writing it, we could tell that story. If this isn't a story that you feel like you could easily retell, if you couldn't go back and say, well, really, this is a story about, if you feel stuck and you can't do that, then you need to go back and you need to revise, because the way that you wrote this story should be able to be retold, because you've done such a good job of using that storytelling voice and conveying the emotion of your story. So remember, I said we're not going to focus on the language and conventions today. Today, you're going to go back and you're just going to look at the structure and development. You're going to take the time to read through your paper, read through scene by scene. Use this checklist as a guide to help you with your revisions. You know exactly what you need to do, what your teachers are looking for within your writing. Focus on the structure, which we've done a lot of this already. So then really take the time and focus on the development today. Remember, your draft can be as messy as it needs to be. Arrows, crossouts, anything, different scenes on different pages, however you need it to be. But this is what we're looking for with your writing. So today you're going to take the time and you are going to revise it. So ready, set, revise.